Well, howdy, I'm John Mark Dempsey, and we are having our second cup of coffee conversation with Mario Villarino, who is our Hopkins County Ag Extension Agent with Texas A&M Agrilife. Got a couple of things we want to talk with Mario about. We'll see if we get to them in this one segment or not. If not, we'll talk to him again.
Excellent.
So let's talk. So you put out a news release here recently about winter storms.
Right.
Now, we've already had one pretty bad winter spell, two, depending on your definition, but there's nothing to say that we won't have some more in the next month or 6 weeks.
Correct, and it's one of those situations that you cannot always be completely ready, but we laid out some tips and principles to follow through when you're dealing with intensive weather. In this particular case, winter storms, because that's what it usually gets us out of whack when the power gets out and we lose supplies and you name it.
So you have some tips, and then a lot of these will be familiar, but it doesn't hurt to cover them again. First thing is stay informed, and of course KSST has a large role to play there.
And that is, I think, critical. We just happen to be coming back from livestock shows and different events when you can kind of foresee what's going to happen and get ready for that. The right vehicle, the right equipment in place, and be prepared to be maybe stranded for a few minutes or maybe a few hours.
Yeah. So, and we have many ways to stay informed these days. Obviously, radio broadcasting, but the internet and people have it all there on their cell phones. So, mostly people are pretty well informed about the weather that may be coming. Home preparation, and I don't want to get into all of this in a great deal of detail, but we are told always about the dripping faucets, and that apparently is pretty effective.
It is, especially when you're thinking about that you might have a cold freeze coming in, that you maintain that water flowing in liquid stage, and that's usually what it gets people a little bit out of shape when they were not prepared and understanding what the changes between that liquid stage of water and the solid stage and the expansion and whatnot, and start blowing pipelines, and when the warmer temperature shows up and there are leaks all over the place.
How cold does it need to get, and for how long before that really becomes a serious
Well, depends
threat?
on the wind factor, and of course, yes, it does,
so
because the wind factor can actually make it feel like it's colder and actually be colder than it.
But it may have more of a freezing effect on pipes?
Sure. Well, it could be depending where they're located, of course. Some parts of the house might be more exposed to colder. Side. Yes, depending where it's coming from and so on. So it's one of those situations you have to be fully aware of that and maintain a way to make sure that you're checking and talking to your family about it. Yeah. Because I think sometimes, people get caught off guard. They assume that, so-and-so was going to take care of it. And life happens. And when you realize, guess what? It just go below 32 degrees and those pipes got exposed.
And leaving the cabinets open is another.
Right is one way to maintain that part of it and maintain that network, because having somebody checking on each other, is one of those things that sometimes we forget. And it's important to maintain a relationship in your neighborhood so people can actually check on you, especially you live alone or you live separate from groups or whatever, that they have a way to know that you're okay, even if you're not there, moving around all over. Because sometimes you get compromised, going places and the car, and I understand that families, elderlies and whatnot, they might not move that much because the weather is not appropriate. So you have to have somebody checking on you and make sure that you're okay, even when you cannot communicate or.
Well, before we run out of time on this, I'll mention emergency supplies. You want about 3 days worth of food, water, and be sure you're up to date on your medications. Right. Vehicle preparedness, antifreeze. Similar question. Of course, you can test for that, but my experience is if you get in the range of the 20s, you're probably not that. Right. And there's not that much of a threat in that situation. But nevertheless, be
well, you're stranded. if you lose battery power and your car is not started, and for some reason you were not prepared for that, all of a sudden everything gets complicated. And the most important part is everybody's going to be in the same situation. So resources, help, it gets compromised to access to it. So you have to be mindful of that.
Yeah. And the last category you mentioned on that news release about winter storms is helping out with livestock and pets.
Right.
Now, pets, maybe you can bring indoors. Probably you can bring indoors if the weather's bad enough, and you can certainly provide shelter for them. But what do the ranchers do about
especially
horses
water? And that's what we're talking about, mainly talking about water. And water is one of those factors that most of the time cattle and horses get compromised because they're not drinking enough because it's not hot enough. So that affects a lot of the intake of feed. When cattle and horses don't drink enough, they don't eat enough. So they cannot maintain their own heat. And that creates some problems sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So the ranchers need to go out and break up the
ice. So make sure they have running water, they can actually drink it, and make sure that those animals are being looked after, and make sure they're drinking. Gauge it. If they're there for some reason that bucket is not being depleted, make sure that you put some warm in there, so make sure they can drink it and take care of it.
I drive down the road in extreme cold weather and bad weather, and the cattle, they're still out there, but they're pretty hardy animals.
Yeah, they are, and they're protected with fat and hair. But like I said, most of the problem happens when, metabolically speaking, they cannot have enough energy to feed themselves, and they get isolated, they get put on the side, they fall asleep, and they cannot handle it.
So break up the ice, and then you need to, obviously, ranchers know to bring in the hay.
And keep an eye on them, especially. Cattle is kind of especially because we have a lot of cattle in Hopkins County that if for some reason they get prostrated, I mean they lay down, they have a hard time maintaining their well-being. So make sure that if for some reason you see a baby calf or a mama cow there in the corner, make sure you go there and get them up and get them moving, so their nerves can actually activate and maintain status. Otherwise, it gets really complicated if they get prostrated for a while.
Okay, we could talk about this for a lot longer, but
it
that's
is
all the time
we've
got. So thanks for...
Make sure they get some help. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for having that second cup of coffee with us. Mario Villarino, our Hopkins County Ag Extension Agent. I'm John Mark Dempsey. This is KSST.
Thank you for having me.